I've talked to a lot of younger students who are like, oh yeah, maybe I will go and become a professor, or if not, I'll do this data science thing. And I think that's definitely the way people should think about it is like no matter who you are or what you think your future is going to be, just keep that door open as an alternative and just kind of, learn a little bit about what you need to know for that path as well. Keep that door open.
Welcome to the Astronomers Turned Data Scientists podcast. I'm Joseph Ahern, one of the co-hosts, and I've been a data scientist for almost 2 years.
And I'm Jeff Silverman, one of the other co-hosts, and I've been a data scientist for 8 years. And today, our guest is a good old friend of mine, Chris Lindner. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Great. Do you want to start out by telling us how you got into astronomy?
Yeah, I wasn't one of those people, most people you talk to in astronomy, they're just like, since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be an astronomer. I knew I was looking at the sky. I was never like that. I wasn't really interested in astronomy till, I originally majored in undergrad in elementary ed was my first major. And then I learned that teaching is not a great profession right now. It's not in a great state, especially I was living in rural South Carolina. And so like rural South Carolina, very, very bad for schools. So eventually was kind of looking to other things, considered maybe being like a high school physics teacher. Again, got kind of pushed out of the teaching side. I was like, oh, maybe I'll teach college. And then as I was doing like my physics courses, there was kind of an opportunity to work with a professor in astronomy, and they were doing lots of coding stuff. I'd done a lot of computer science stuff in the past. So I was like, oh, cool, supercomputer stuff and physics stuff. I like that. I don't know anything about stars or anything, but I'll get into that. And we were doing black hole simulations and all that, and I just really enjoyed it. Thought it was just really interesting, and then just yeah, kept going with it from there. Went straight into grad school at UT Austin after that, and got my PhD there.
So that's where I met you, was at UT when I was a postdoc. You were a grad student. There were a number of people in your grad class and probably plus or minus a year or so who went right from grad school into data science. So this was back in 2012-ish, right? Is that about right? 12, 13?
2014 is when I finished. Yeah,
14. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. That makes it. Yeah. So yeah, right around then. So data science was still, on the newer side. It wasn't quite as well
Yeah.
known, certainly not as well known in academia. But one thing I'd love to hear more about that I know you and some of your cohort did was sort of had like a study group, reading group about data sciencey topics, Python topics, et cetera. So tell us about how that came about, what you did, and could
Yeah.
people reproduce that, themselves or at other places?
Yeah. Yeah, to give you the little bit of the story, yeah, I was in grad school, and yeah, at the time, people really didn't talk about what happened to people who didn't go into academia at all. That wasn't a thing. People didn't come in not wanting to be in academia, and so it was kind of a weird thing to me. I came in like knowing, oh yeah, I definitely want to be a professor. This is what I want to do. I want to teach. Kind of learned that like, the teaching even in college level is not necessarily the greatest profession, not the best fit for me. And then I started looking around too and noticing like it was really hard for people to get jobs at that time. And postdocs were a big thing at that time where people were postdocing, for 6, 8 years. And then really talented people I knew like were not getting jobs. And so I was like, should maybe start looking into other things. And yeah, I didn't know anything about data science or anything about, I thought like, oh, I'll just be a coder or something like that. But one of the people in our cohort kind of said like, oh, I heard about this data science thing. I'm going to reach out to somebody at a random company and talk to him about it. And just talk to some random guy at some data science position. And he was just like, yeah, there's a lot of great jobs here and I'm really happy. And, he was someone from like an academic background and all that. And just kind of got us really excited. And so then we said, okay, well, we want to learn to do whatever this is. And yeah, you're absolutely right that this was the very early days where almost all data scientists were being hired straight out of academia, and there weren't really programs. There definitely weren't undergrad programs. There were maybe a few classes, maybe out there somewhere. I mean, I think this was right after that first like free online class came about that everybody took. But this was like right when that came out, and yeah, it was just there. It was really hard to find information on this stuff. So we're like, okay, well, we'll just kind of study ourselves. We'll try to talk to as many industry people as we can. We went to some of the local, being in Austin, there's a lot of tech stuff here. So we were able to go to meetups and things learn a little bit about like what it means to be in industry and that sort of thing. And then we eventually kind of pieced together, okay, we think these are the kind of things they're going to ask us in interviews. So let's practice them. Let's practice coding. Let's practice going to a whiteboard and coding, because that's just like a totally, that's not a natural skill. I think even for people who work in industry, it's not a natural skill to go to a whiteboard and write code on there. So it's something we all kind of had to practice, and we would grill each other, and we came up with, practice sets and all that. And yeah, would, meet every week and just spend a couple hours doing that. Yeah, that was really great. That was super helpful. And yeah, I encourage anybody, get yourself into some sort of community if you're thinking about this at all, where you can learn more, because there's a lot to learn, and a lot of like being able to ask questions is super, super helpful. And so it was great. And then it was also nice too, because yeah, like I said, it was a community where we could people would every once in a while find somebody that they talked to, and then they could come back and tell us what they learned. Oh, you talked to this data scientist and they told you this. Awesome, cool. And we could, go back and learn. I think nowadays it's a bit easier because there's so many people who have made that jump. But I think definitely when I was finishing up, certainly when you finished up, Jeff, like nobody was going into this, and it felt like people who went into industry just kind of went into a black hole. Like nobody heard anything from them. It was just kind of they disappeared completely off our radar. I'm happy to hear that's changing a bit nowadays, and it sounds like there's more resources, and including stuff like this, which is awesome. But yeah, at the time we kind of had to make our own path, and it was kind of fun, very scary, but it was cool.
Kind of related to hearing back from people who go into industry, one thing I thought about recently is whether I should like reach out to try to give a talk to the graduate students at some university. I mean, where I went was University of Idaho, and that I'm 6 hours away from there right now. So that's not the easiest. Maybe somewhere more local to me, but I don't have connections there. I don't know, but maybe at Austin, is that happening? Or maybe what other connections might there be for like that communication?
Yeah, I mean, I will say overall, I've been disappointed at the level that the university has done, but I think the alumni network, has still done a good job. We have a Slack channel that we started kind of originally for our study group, but it's just turned now into the de facto astronomy grad student channel. And so now there's a bunch of us who have been out of grad school for 10 years, a lot of us with industry jobs who are still on there, and we'll answer questions for folks if they come by. But also, the current grad students have their own little separate Slack channel where they're doing their own thing. And so it's just a nice space to have that like that network. And so we kind of had to build our own. I think after a few of us got jobs early on, like we had tried to reach out to the department and be like, hey, is there anything we can do? Can we give talks? All that. They really weren't receptive at the time. I think they're getting a little more receptive to that now. I did get an invite to something, a few weeks ago. I think the College of Natural Sciences at the university has been doing some events and things. And I think what's different now too is a lot of students are coming in with the idea that this is even an option. Like they're like, oh yeah, maybe I've talked to a lot of younger students who are like, oh yeah, maybe I will go and become a professor, or if not, I'll do this data science thing. And I think that's definitely the way people should think about it. Is like no matter who you are or what you think your future is going to be, just keep that door open as an alternative, and just kind of learn a little bit about what you need to know for that path as well. Keep that door open. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, I'm also part of Astronomy on Tap in Austin, something that Jeff actually started. That's still going strong. And so I've been kind of running the show here for that. And that's been a really awesome way to stay connected with the department, talk to students every once in a while. Every week they meet up at the same bar a few times a year. I'll show up there and say hi to people and introduce myself to new people, and, usually get a few questions and things like that. But it's, yeah, mostly been there's university events here and there, but it's mostly still been kind of grassroots, just the alumni just kind of trying to keeping it going, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I want to add, a few things to that. I mean, yeah, obviously involved with a bunch of this stuff while I was at UT and broader astronomer turned data scientist stuff, throughout the country. I did give actually a data science careers talk at UT. I think it was like right after I got my first data science job. So I
Nice.
hesitate to go back and look at those slides because I'm sure I said a bunch of stupid stuff that have since learned is not right or dumb to say,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't remember if that was through the department or like I was just visiting and I showed up and was like, hey, let's get pizza lunch together, and I gave a talk.
Probably what it was through, because I gave a couple of those talks there too. And the grad students and postdocs made their own seminar series there. And so they would invite
That's right. That's right.
people like us to that. So
That was another thing
yeah,
I brought from Berkeley, actually.
yeah.
I helped start that initially at UT. That's right. Yes, it
Uh,
was GSPS.
yeah,
Yes. It was
yes,
grad
yes,
student postdoc.
yes, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
And so that I think is where they pulled it in. And
Yep.
yeah, so again, like a very grassroots thing, but yeah, I
Right.
think that's very cool. And that's still going on now. Even from what I understand, really broadened it to where it's like
Yes.
a lot of times just people talking about their hobbies and like weird interests and things, which I think
Yep.
is just
Yep.
great.
I think it's great.
Like, yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
But
the
yeah, yeah, that's a cool way to do it too.
yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I was going to say sort of the broader point I think that you made is that, a decade ago now, just about, it was very grassroots and, kind of people self-organizing in their own local community. And I think that's still a lot of the case, right? I mean, even at a place like UT, where you said is a huge tech hub and has a bajillion tech jobs and
yeah.
many data science jobs and companies, and even still, a world famous premier university is there and having, some trouble. Maybe not active blocking, but not the active support that you might want for something like this, or as much of it as you might want. So certainly
Yeah,
still an issue, and I think those self-organizing groups are something to support and help out where you can. Yeah.
yeah, it's a little disappointing to see. I mean, I understand why of like most of the faculty don't have any knowledge of this area
Yeah.
whatsoever. I mean, it is cool seeing now like machine learning and even AI bleeding into astronomy research. So I think they are getting more interested in this stuff now. But yeah, certainly at the time, nobody was doing machine
Yeah.
learning at the department, that sort of thing. The AAS as well was doing, they've kind of tried, they have these career panels, they kind of try to do these things. I was on that careers committee for a while. I think you're on it now. Is that right, Jeff? Yeah.
I was going to get into that. Yeah, yet another one. So yes,
Yeah.
I did want to bring that up for, some self-promotion, some, general knowledge that, like, yeah,
Yeah.
the AAS does have the employment committee. There's also BACAC, which is what I'm on, the Beyond Academic Careers Advisory Council. We work with the employment committee, we work with other committees to try and, yeah, bring some of these
Oh, that's
uh
interesting. So
beyond careers.
that's interesting. Yeah, I think they called it something else when I was on it. So it sounds like they've really broadened it to be
Yep.
these sort of, yeah, other careers. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah, yeah. And so, they are big supporters of ATDS. ATDS started as a grassroots thing. Chris, you were
Yeah.
an early participant and organizer of the
Yeah.
second ATDS meeting in
Yeah, I think
2020, I believe.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The second one I co-hosted that one. I mean, that was yeah, ATDS was a blast, and I think that was really exciting to just see how many people were excited, interested in that, and it sounds like it's still going very strong. I hope to make it out to another one again. I think I've made it to like three of those, but I'd love to go to more of those. But yeah, I think it's such a cool experience to just see like there were so many new young astronomers who were just interested in it, really wanted to hear what we had to say, what was going on at some of our boring jobs and stuff. Seeing people really excited about that's, really energizing, and so that was cool.
Would you like to talk a little bit more about your transition into data science then and what that was like? What were the different steps that you took along the way? And then we can proceed from there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's such a blur. It was like 10 years ago now. Yeah. But yeah, when I was first going into the job market, finished up my PhD, and just had a few months of money in my pocket to like survive, and it was like I hope I find a job in about 4 or 5 months. I don't know what I'm going to do otherwise, but I've been told by some people in the industry, they're like, there's lots of jobs out there, don't worry about it, you'll be okay. And ultimately had a few referrals at like three different companies, which I will definitely say, and we can get into the job search stuff later, but referrals definitely still the best way to actually get a foot in the door for jobs. And I think literally every job I've had, yeah, every job I've had has been through a referral. So yeah, I do think that's the way to go. But yeah, I just got very lucky through people I've met through tech meetups and things and weird random connections I made, friends of friends, stuff like that. Had referrals at different companies and ultimately ended up a couple of the companies I looked at, they had smaller teams and weren't working on as interesting things as the company I ended up with. And I knew that like I'd gotten the advice early on, and I think this is 100% true to like, yeah, when you're starting out in data science, you want to work with a bigger team because there's just a ton of stuff for you to learn. And if you're just on your own or there's just one other person, like you're just going to be so isolated. And even now, honestly, as a senior person, I would have a hard time taking a singleton, being the singular data science person or data person at a company. I think it's kind of scary. It's really nice to have a community, both because you know that there's more people to learn from, there's more people to bounce questions off of. There's also just usually a better infrastructure because if not, you are the person, the only person building the infrastructure, you know? And so I think that's a little scary. So yeah, luckily I got that good advice early on. I was like, okay, there was this ed tech startup and they had a fairly large data science team. I mean, at the time they had like 6 or 7 people. I think at our peak we were like 12, 14, like, you know, just data scientists in addition to a bunch of data engineers and things like that. But it was a company that was trying to predict student success, predict who's going to drop out of college or who's going to stay in college, working with universities, helping them do that sort of thing. And yeah, that was a really fun experience. It was smaller startup. It started at like 50 people when I started there, grew to about 250 people at its peak. And yeah, I mean, it was cool because I mean, working in the education space, obviously had a lot of knowledge already about, you know, sort of how higher ed works coming from academia. So that was really neat to be in something that had like an interesting area and feel like you're actually helping something good. You don't always get that opportunity to work on good things in this field. So it's nice when you're working on something that like, okay, our purpose was to help students graduate college. That's like a good thing. So it was really cool, and I got to work on a product. Basically, built out a product where I was kind of tasked with. We want to make a product that says something about courses and student success. We don't know what it's going to be, and I got through the go through the whole process with a very, very small team of prototyping out like what are the things universities are interested in, what are different things we can say about courses, what's predictive, and eventually turning that into a product. It was really cool experience. We were looking at basically like what courses you would pick a degree program at your university and we could identify, all right, these are what we think are like the key courses that really are highly predictive of a student's success or not. We found some interesting things. There was actually a New York Times article that got written about us, about my product, which was awesome. And then we were working with one university where they found that their math majors, if they got a B in Calculus 1, they were something like 90% chance to fail. And, you know, the university's mind was blown by this because, like, wait, a B is a good grade. Why would you fail? And it's like, well, yeah, you get a B in Calc 1, you're going to get a C in Calc 2. You know, a year later, you're going to get a D in differential equations. And then you're like 2, 3 years in your degree, and you're like, man, I can't cut it. I'm just out of college completely. And we could see all of these people who would follow this trajectory. And we were like, yeah, what if we could have intervened earlier and figured out, like, hey, maybe they need some help. Maybe they should consider different majors. Maybe we should find, break up calculus in ways to where it's multiple classes for certain people who need a little more time to like learn those fundamentals really well. And so we worked with them then to kind of rearrange that whole thing. And that was, yeah, really cool success story, really awesome to work with. And yeah, that was really fun. And I'm really happy about the experience I had there. At the same time, it was a startup. I think the financials were a mess. I don't think the leadership was going in a great direction. Ultimately, they ran out of money, had to lay a bunch of people off. Some shell of them still exists, so they eventually got bought up by somebody else. But my stock options were worth nothing at that point. Like nothing was worth anything at that point. So from the financial side, it wasn't the most beneficial thing, and had to go through that experience of being laid off and all that. But from the like experience side, like I can't think of like a better experience for like a first job for a data scientist where you get to work on something cool, learn from a lot of very senior people, you know, and work with just a lot of data people. Like that was really nice experience.
Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, I remember you talking about it at the time, and yeah, I remember when that article came out, and it was very cool. And yeah, I think you're pretty lucky that like your first job out of academia was in something that you cared about, but also that you had some background knowledge, right? We've talked to a
Yeah.
lot of people where, including myself and Joseph, where like we had to learn a whole new domain of expertise and acronyms and all that stuff, on the job in whatever company we started at. So yeah, that worked out really nicely for you, I know. So I'm kind of curious though, you had a decent sized team you could ask questions of. That's great. You had some domain knowledge already from academia and higher education. But going from that study group and what you thought the interviews were going to be like and what they might ask and what skills you might need, what was kind of some of the biggest surprises and differences in like how the interviews went or what the content was or what the day-to-day content was? And you're like, oh, I studied all the SQL and I never use SQL. for example, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, for the interview process, and as we'll get to later, well, and so one thing I didn't mention is I did eventually become a manager like a year into my job at Civitas. Was this company they were called Civitas Learning, which is pretty funny and just really speaks to how new the field was at a time where like a year in, I was like a senior person in data scientist or whatever in data science. Like it was just such a new field or whatever. But then because of that, and because we were growing so fast, I got to do a lot of interviewing there, and I got to do a lot of interviewing at Indeed, my next company. I probably interviewed somewhere around 300 to 400 people over my career. So that's something we can chat about later. But I think my initial impressions, and I still hold this to this day, the first big surprise to me was what a crapshoot interviews are of what they'll even do. There is no standardization. Companies will ask you the weirdest stuff. I mean, there's basic things you can go in and expect. Like they'll probably ask you something coding-ish. They'll probably ask you something mathy-ish. But beyond that, it really can be anything. I've gotten personality tests. I've gotten brain teasers, like lists of long brain teasers. I've gotten just the weirdest stuff. And then I've had interviews where they didn't ask me a single technical question. They were just like, hey, tell me about what you've worked on. Okay, that's cool. And then that's it. And that's the whole interview. And they had no idea. So, I mean, it's just like a total crapshoot. And it's similarly like, now on the other side, I mean, one of the biggest advices I give to people is just like, don't take it too personally. Don't take it too seriously. Don't stress yourself out preparing too much. Like, you should spend some time preparing for these things. But at the end of the day, it's a crapshoot in a lot of ways where you don't know what they're going to ask. They can ask you some really wild stuff. You also don't know how you're being graded. And honestly, most of the time when I see a good person who doesn't get a job or like someone who's roughly qualified doesn't get a job, it has nothing to do with them whatsoever. It's either like some superstar just happened to apply for the job at the same time, and so they got it over this other person, or the funding ran out for that position and actually they ended up closing it and you didn't get it, or they ended up doing an internal hire and, whatever, which is also one of the problems is they often won't even tell you these things after the fact. You often, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I applied for a job, went through a few stages, and then they didn't even tell me I didn't get the job. Like they just let it go into a vacuum, and I had to be the one to keep asking them. They're like, "Oh yeah, actually, never mind. The position's not there, or whatever." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So don't take it too personally. Don't stress yourself out too much. But do some studying. There's going to be some luck involved in it, and you just got to roll with it and just try to stay calm and stay sane. It'll be okay in the long run. Yeah, I mean, I think the other things that stuck out to me, the people I talked to in industry were right. There, especially at that time, there were a lot of jobs, and I was very, very, very worried. And actually, at the time, but I ended up getting, two out of the three main companies that I had made it anywhere in the interview process. Actually, no, three of them gave me offers at the time. Now, I don't think we're quite in the exact same job market now, but still, I mean, I think, I still think the jobs are out there and don't stress yourself out too much. There are opportunities out there. It takes a lot of time. It's a bit of a crapshoot, but, just be calm. Things will work out. If you're decent at coding, decent at stat stuff, eventually something will work out for you.
You mentioned that the jobs that you've gotten have largely been through referrals. I'm just wondering, like, how you got to know these people. Were they fellow coworkers at previous companies? Were the people you met in the astronomy community or childhood friends or what?
Yeah, a little bit of mix of everything. For my first job, didn't really have any referrals. Like I said, I didn't really know anybody in industry who had, made that job. I hadn't really kept contact with like the alums and stuff who had made that jump. So I really didn't have much. But the meetups in town were really good. We were going to this thing called the Austin Python meetup. I think it's still going. But there's just a lot of random industry people there. And eventually you meet some people, somebody hands out business cards, somebody mentions they're hiring, and you just, be willing to meet with people and talk with people and all that. and you can ask people too, like, hey, if you're not hiring, do you happen to know somebody else who is, and those sorts of things. And a referral doesn't have to be like somebody you know really, really well. It could just be somebody you just randomly met, or honestly haven't even met. That it's just like a friend of a friend. And so some of mine were that early on, were just friends of friends. Like, I don't know, I heard this person's in industry. Oh, my friend's boyfriend is in industry, and they happen to work at a company, and I guess I'll apply to that, and whatever. But getting that step, getting that referral immediately gets your resume in front of people. And that's the hardest thing in that, is because most companies are getting stacks of hundreds of resumes. They don't know how to sort them. They still haven't figured that out. God knows now they're using AI stuff. Who knows what they're doing with that crap and what that's picking for. So if you can skip over that first step, it just gives you an enormous, enormous edge. So yeah, and I've known people who just straight up will message, don't even know people, will just message people on LinkedIn. I mean, I've had people do this and be like, "Hey, can we get a cup of coffee? I am interested in working at your company." And I'm like, sometimes I will, sometimes I won't, but I don't mind people asking that. And if I do that and give them a referral, most people get referral bonuses. So, it's kind of in my best interest if I get you hired. So, it's kind of a win-win thing. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. The worst thing is they'll just say no. They're not going to be offended or upset or anything if you ask them for it. So, yeah, and then nowadays I've been in the industry long enough. Yeah, it's mostly through for what my next job at Indeed, it was somebody actually was seeking me out for a long time. And then when I got laid off, they're like, "Oh yeah, now you can just start working here." I'm like, okay, cool. And then for this last job, for my current job at Affinipay, it was somebody I worked at my first company who is now like a manager. He's now my manager there. And so, yeah, it just kind of worked out that way. Once you get your first job, the doors, it's a lot easier usually to get your next few jobs. But yeah.
You mentioned, you've been a hiring manager for many years. You've interviewed hundreds of people, seen who knows however many thousands of resumes, and was it Indeed, and gave talks on what are data science hiring managers looking for, what are data scientists need. That's a few years ago now, I know, and so I'd love to hear how you've seen over your career, that first data scientist job straight out of academia, what are the skills that somebody needs today or sort of expected today, and how that's different than it was, when you were starting out 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so when I was starting out, I mean, nobody had any idea what was going on. It was just a total, people didn't know what a data scientist was, what they did, but it was a hot new thing, kind of like what AI is now. It was just this hot new thing that every company felt like they had to be doing. And so a lot of these companies didn't even know what they were hiring for or what they were doing. And it was just, total mess. Nowadays we're a little more mature in that sense. We're, well, a lot more mature in that sense of like companies have seen where data science has worked and made them money. Some companies have seen where actually that investment hasn't paid off, and they have a little better idea of what they're kind of looking for. I think when I was at Indeed, I had given a couple talks, at the Astronomers turned data scientists meeting, gave a couple talks using Indeed data to just see like what is going on with the data science industry. And seeing, when I was starting out, for example, it was almost entirely everybody I worked with had like a master's or a PhD in like math or science. Nowadays there's data science undergrad programs, there's boot camps, there's data science graduate programs. There's everybody kind of knows about these things. There's also a lot of people hopping over from like data engineering or software engineering who've gotten curious about it and hopping over. We see that a lot more. I mean, that was kind of what the Indeed data was showing. It was at the time like an even split when I gave my first talk, and then like the next year it was like even more so, going away from just hiring people straight out of academia and more of these people from either direct data science degrees or coming from like in industry roles already. That being said, we still hire plenty of people straight out of school, but I do think the bar has gotten a little bit higher because you are a little bit competing with those people. And I mean, I think when I first graduated, there were a lot of people who came out who didn't do the studying very much, and basically all of them got jobs anyway, like didn't do the studying, the prep that we had done. Nowadays, I don't think that would fly. I think you would have a very hard time just coming out with an astronomy PhD, having done no research, no practice whatsoever. It's going to be tough. So you need to do a little bit of prep. It's not to say that it's going to be over the top, big change to what you're doing, but you need to be a little more thoughtful for it because it's just a little more competitive. I think the other big change that we've seen is, we didn't really know what data science was 10 years ago, and now it's really like a bunch of different roles, but we still haven't really well defined them. But companies at least know a little better what they're looking for. And so I've seen this drawn as like a spectrum of like there's data analysts on one side and there's machine learning engineers on the other side, and then you can be anywhere in between sort of that, where like some data scientists can do, they don't do any machine learning whatsoever. You're just analyzing big data sets and just helping people figure out, solve business problems, understand their business better using data. You go a little bit deeper where you're doing some light machine learning, maybe some stuff just internally for the company. You're building some simple linear models for like helping them figure out who sales should reach out to and those sorts of things. There's also A/B testing and stuff on that sort of spectrum of helping people design experiments and tests in tech. Then you can get a little more technical where it's like, no, you're more focused on the coding stuff. Okay, we know that Amazon wants this model where they can tell you which product you should buy next. Oh, and also it needs to be delivered to the customer in zero point 0.1 millisecond, in 10 milliseconds or something like that, and so you've got to really know like not only about how machine learning models work, but how to code in a way that's super optimized and it's going to be fast and what the technologies are out there and that sort of stuff. And then there's like the extreme, I mean, where we're seeing now, where I think of like AI stuff, where if you are someone who truly knows the nuts and bolts of like how the internals of an AI model work and all of that, that can be very, very highly technical. And all of these jobs can be labeled as data scientists. And whereas like 10 years ago, I think they would have just hired you and hoped that you could figure it out. Nowadays, usually the interview process is going to be tailored a little bit more closely to what kind of data scientists they're hiring for. And it's tricky because the job ad might not make that really clear. In fact, a lot of times they just copy and paste the job ad from somewhere. And so, like it's not even really what the role is about. But usually as you're getting interviewed, you can kind of figure out what they're actually looking for. Like, oh, you need somebody who knows these specific technologies very well. Or, oh, you're just looking for someone who can just analyze data. Okay, I can do that sort of thing. I think those are the two big trends I've seen of just like changing kind of who's coming into these roles and then changing sort of the definition of like, oh yeah, this is actually many roles and we're kind of defining them a little bit better over time.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. I totally agree with like your spectrum description. When I started giving talks about data science careers, I think I had 4 boxes to kind of describe that, and it's now grown to 6 boxes. And and I talk about that, it's a high dimensional space, right? Like you're not in just one box, depending on your team or week to week or project to project, you might be on multiple. And the other thing I wanted to point out, kind of just to really hammer home, is that spectrum is really just a spectrum of types of work. It has nothing to do with seniority, pay, degree level, any of that stuff, right?
Yep.
You
Yep.
can be a brand new out of undergrad machine learning engineer. You can be a senior staff analyst that is doing, something more on the beginning of the spectrum you started describing. So it really is that high dimensional space. And, I think thinking about the type of job is one of those dimensions, and the types of skills you need, the types of methodologies, et cetera. And, that is, yeah, maybe in the job description, maybe you find it out as you're interviewing, but that's definitely, one piece of it, one aspect. I've never worked with natural language processing. So if I see a JD that says that, I don't care
Yeah.
how good the pay is, like I'm not going to bother applying. It's a waste of everybody's time. Whereas I tend to do a lot more on the analytics and visualization and business side and product analytics and experimentation. That's what I've done a lot of. So I'm super senior in that side of things, and can get paid a good amount of money to do that kind of stuff, even if it's not AI out of the box or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah.
just wanted to put that out there, and not to you know confuse the point more, but it's a high dimensional space.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, I think your call out of it's not about seniority. It's not even necessarily about background. My friend, it's interesting. I did highly computationally complicated stuff. I was doing supercomputer simulations when I was in grad school, but I found the part that I really enjoy is not the heavy lifting coding stuff. I really just enjoy like the product side of things and like really like trying to find solutions to problems. I'll do some machine learning, but I like to do it next to product people where we're really focused on, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve first? John Jardell was a guy in my grad school, graduated the same year as me. We did the same route. He was in our practice class and all that. Went the other direction, and he went very much more into the heavy. He was not very engineering focused in his grad school, but then became very engineering focused on the job because he learned that's what he really liked to do and what he really excelled at. So it doesn't even matter necessarily where you're coming from. I think you'll find as you're working through it, you'll kind of figure out what types of work you enjoy more, what types of things you're naturally better at and kind of fit into better. And people kind of just tend to specialize themselves over time and tend to move around over time sometimes too.
In addition to the technical skills, what non-technical skills would you say have been important or maybe we need to value more for the future of getting different positions? And maybe some things that coming from astronomy we might have advantages or disadvantages in.
Yeah, I think some of the skills, I mean, a big thing is just giving good presentations and being able to present problems really well. Giving good presentations has paid off very, very well in my career. I mean, for my very first job, I had this one really cool simulation that the software let you do it 3D with 3D glasses. And so I always put that in my job talks. It was so great because you put that on and just immediately everybody's mind's blown and they don't even know what questions to ask you anymore. They're just like, I'm watching this cool black hole thing with in 3D come at me and it's a great time. So don't discount showmanship. Giving like a good engaging presentation pays off a lot. Trying to be likable and outgoing and interesting, giving them things to remember you about, that pays off a lot in your career actually. So I wouldn't undersell that. I think too, knowing how to break down a problem and explain a problem well, like one of the questions I think that is very common now in interviews is just sort of like, tell me about a problem that you solved or whatever. And it can be part of your research or in a previous job or whatever, that kind of thing. That's a very common type of question you'll get. And, I've coached a lot of people on this, and it's just about you really spend some time practicing how to answer that kind of question well. I break it down very simply of just like, present here is the problem that we're trying to solve. Here was the approach that I took to solve it. Here's how we actually measured that my approach actually solved the problem, and just telling that complete story. Because a lot of times what will happen when you're talking to people, when you're interviewing people, they'll get too lost in the details about like, oh, I found this really cool, really niche algorithm, and let me tell you about how we tuned it and how we tweaked it and how we did that. And to me, especially as a more product focused person, I want to know, okay, yeah, but did that actually help solve the problem? Or did you just disappear for a month because you found some new package that you wanted to play with and like, and you wanted to play with some new tool and tweaked it and never even got to an actual solution or whatever. So figuring out how to describe and, describe your scientific research in the same way, you got to figure out how to describe it for a layman of like, yeah, they don't know anything about astronomy, but like, hey, yeah, we were concerned about this issue, these types of stars, and here's why that was interesting. Here was the problem I had in a way you can understand. Here was the approach we took to solve it. Here's how we knew that we solved it. I think just having that kind of approach, having that way to break down problems goes a long, long way, both in getting you the interview, getting you the job, and it's still something I do a ton in the job of like stopping meetings and going, hey, 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 let's go back to what is the actual problem we're trying to solve here. Let's not get in the weeds, that kind of stuff comes up a lot. So that would be like the general advice I would give. And yeah, in general, as more of a producty person, I think a lot of my work is just around that, about just like problem solving, working with people, working across teams, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I've really enjoyed that kind of stuff. But if you're more of a technical person, there's other fits too. But it always helps to be able to have that kind of mindset of how do we solve problems, that sort of thing.
So I talked about Civitas, you talked about Indeed. Tell us a bit about your latest place that you haven't been at very long, I believe, right?
Oh yeah, so after Indeed, so I worked at so yeah after Civitas got laid off, but got pretty pulled quickly into Indeed. Worked there for 3 years on a wide range of different things. I mean, they're a very very data heavy company. I mean, they were a very different experience just because they're such a huge company that like it's where you go into this problem of like, oh, we've got tens of millions of people hitting the website every day compared to at Civitas where it's like, okay, we got maybe 500 people hitting the website every day or something like that. There's problems on totally different scales, huge data sets. We had more data on labor than the Department of Labor did. So that was really cool, really exciting to like work on this space where you just, very different of just working on this really, really big data problems, and they had experts in everything. They had huge data science teams there of like, I mean, I think I was technically labeled product science. So they had split out actually their data team into data science and product science. And data science was more like machine learning engineer, product science was more generalist sort of thing. But at the end of it, between the two specialties, we probably had like 150 people, which is pretty big for a company. And so that was really cool being in this huge, huge data team, working with huge data sets, having lots of people to learn from. All that was really fun. And so they got to work on. And yeah, and I ended up being a manager for a while there as well. And that was really fun and really cool. Then yeah, once after the pandemic hit, I was just like, I wanted to take some time off and do something else. So I quit my job and I said I'm going to go play poker for a couple of years. And this has been something I've been doing on the side and kind of wanted to do anyway. So I quit my job, played poker professionally for a couple of years. That was a lot of fun. That was like a nice post-pandemic way to just get out, see people, do traveling for poker, and do other things and do something different. That was a lot of fun. And then yeah, and then that was fun. I don't think the hours are for me. Nights and weekends all the time is pretty grueling. It's a pretty big grind, but it was a nice break. And so then yeah, and then I hopped back into industry. So I just did my 1 year anniversary at a company called Affinipay. We do like legal software. So basically working with lawyers, figuring out how can we improve your practice? How can we improve your document management? How can we improve the way that you collect money from customers, from your clients, those sorts of things. So working with them. And this has been a really interesting experience. This has been one where it has been more on I was actually the first data scientist by title, although I was coming into a data team where, like I said, I knew the manager. He was a data engineer I worked with, and I knew a few of the other data engineers there were also previous Civitas people. And I liked the way they thought, and they thought very similar to me. So like I was like, okay, I know that I will at least have a community of people who we think similarly, and it'll be okay. But it was a little more risky of like coming into something that's yeah, not as well defined. And that's been sort of, we've gotten two more data scientists since then, but that's been kind of the struggle with it right now is kind of really they're a company that hasn't been as data focused. They have a lot of data, they have a lot of opportunities, but like teaching product managers how to build a product that works primarily with data, they're not quite there yet. And so that's been a curve of like really getting them there, really teaching them, really understanding it. It's definitely the kind of job where, yeah, I would not recommend a junior person come into this role because it's going to be just overwhelming and disheartening. So it's been more of a challenge, but it's been really interesting. It's also been interesting because they've got a team of engineers who are focused on AI right now, and that's something I had no experience with. Every company right now is an AI. I think if we're talking about the trends in the field right now, you asked that question earlier about the trends in the field. That's the latest thing that's really happening is like now a lot of data science jobs are getting replaced with AI jobs. And I think that is the one challenge for people who are trying to get in the field right now is hiring for data science jobs, especially like 6 months ago, was very, very low unless you had AI expertise and all of that. Now I think we're starting to see the traditional roles pick back up again. I'm starting to see more people get those jobs, but that was like an interesting thing. I was lucky. My boss liked me. He trusted my skills, and he's like, "Yeah, you can figure this stuff out." And he knew like there was a little bit of AI stuff they were looking for, but not super focused on AI. Like mostly the engineers are focused on that. But yeah, that was cool. That's been a cool experience to kind of learn about that technology and see where it's at and be kind of on the forefront of this thing that everybody's talking about right now. And so it's been really cool to kind of learn that stuff and see what works about it and what doesn't and all that. Yeah.
I'm curious to know more about poker and
Yeah.
if you are able to like use statistics to help you as
Yeah.
a data scientist, of course.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So poker was something I got into in grad school. And was playing very small stakes. We were playing like at parties, we'd play $5 tournaments. And then I kind of just got into it, kind of worked my way up, and then eventually, over a decade, then was kind of eventually playing $10,000 entry tournaments. And I was like, I always had it in the back of my mind, like, "Oh, okay, this is something I can consider professionally." The game itself, yeah, is very the math helps a lot. It's a lot of math, a lot of game theory is really where the best players in the world are at. There are still players who kind of try to play by feel and kind of try to brute force situations and try to like exploit players really heavily. But the top tier players in the world, it's all about math. especially for the most played game right now, No Limit Hold'em, Texas Hold'em, the game that most people have played. That game in over the last few years has been more or less solved by what they call GTO, so game theory optimal solvers. And so a lot of actually practicing that nowadays is just playing against computers, looking up spots against the computer or running through sort of, it'll kind of give you drills on like, okay, what would you do here? Oh, well, that's not what the computer would say to do here. And so it is, and over time you kind of figure out these patterns and figure out sort of the math and understand why of like, oh yeah, the computer's doing that because there's a 30% chance I'm going to hit my flush here, but that's not quite enough to make this call because they're giving me such a bad price. There's a lot of like mathy things that come down into it. So it is a very math minded thing. It is a very game theory thing. And so yeah, it's been fun. I've really enjoyed the other side of poker, the poker world, which is what they call mixed games, which is like the non-traditional games, basically the games that haven't been solved yet. In fact, I play like a lot of dealer's choice mix, which is where people can make up games on the fly. It's a game that nobody in the world has ever played before. You're just playing it now, and you got to figure out how to do it right then. And I've just found I've kind of had the skill set where I can figure out those kind of games quickly and see kind of the patterns of like, oh, this game is kind of like this game. So then statistically, my strategy should be kind of like this or whatever, and kind of figuring that on the spot. And even to the point too, where I've written like solvers for little bits of like, let me calculate the statistics for this situation. Let me calculate all the possible outcomes and see what could happen here. I've written my own little solvers and things for games that, yeah, haven't, there's no public solvers for yet and all that. And that's been really fun to do and work out those. So yeah, it's been a cool way to scratch the math itch. It's a very different world to live in. It's a very different kind of job. It's the kind of job where you can have a month where you lose money. You go to work every day for 40 hours a week and you're down money somehow. And that is the randomness of the game. And that's a whole separate element that you've just got to emotionally be able to handle. And yeah, weird hours and like a lot of stress and a lot of different aspects, but also a very fun social atmosphere, very you get to interact with people that you would never interact with, especially in like the very like tech city, tech bubble sort of thing. Like I get to interact with an entirely different kind of person, and that's really cool. I still enjoy the social aspect a lot and still play a lot, mostly for that reason. But it's an experience. It's been really interesting. Yeah.
It has been a while since I played poker. I think I've probably played since we last played when I was, yeah, out in Austin, but
Yeah.
not many times since then. But yeah, it was always fun and, maybe slightly intimidating, playing against some semi-pros. But, if I play random enough, you don't know what the hell I'm going to do. And that was like my one way I could actually like, not lose money. So anyway, um, so we're getting to the end, and the last thing we always ask people, any parting words of wisdom or advice or things you want to, bring up that we didn't quite get to.
Good question. So a couple things I'll say. One thing I'd say is if you're afraid of losing touch with the astronomy community after moving out of it, I think that's a lot of fear of a lot of people I talk to who are in the grad programs. I think there still are still ways to stay in touch. It's been really cool. Like I said, I've helped out with our astronomy on tap here, and that's been really fun and like really cool. And I get to see new research and meet new researchers and keep up with it on some level there. Not quite the same. You're still gonna your domain knowledge about astronomy is still gonna atrophy a bit, but you can still stay involved with people, stay connected to people, and all that. So I would say, don't fear that too much. It can still be in your life, and that's okay if that's the part you're gonna miss. Yeah, other piece of advice I would give is yeah, just reiterating what I said before is just like calm down about it, take a deep breath, don't worry too much about like job interviews, don't take them too seriously, be more casual with them. You'll just do better if you're just like calm and casual and just not too worried about it versus just stressed out and pressured and feeling like you got to answer every question perfectly and all that. It's just not really what it comes down to. And like I said, most of the decisions, most of what actually happens with whether or not you get a job is pretty arbitrary, going to be based on crap you weren't even thinking about. Like what goes on behind the scenes in the hiring side is bonkers. It's just companies are weird and most people once they get to the other side they see that and they're like, oh yeah, that was really stupid. I was so stressed out about that. But it's very intimidating. I get it from the interviewee side, but you'll do a lot better if you're a lot more casual and a lot more just like, I'm going to try for this job and do my best. If it doesn't work out that day, I'll apply to the next one. It'll be fine, whatever. Try to keep cool and you'll do well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Chris.
Yeah, man,
And
thanks for having me. This was great.
thank you for joining us in today's episode of the Astronomers Turned Data Scientists podcast. Please subscribe so you can find out when we release future episodes.
And thanks again, Chris, for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks guys. This was great.